Catholic youth gathered in Rome this week to draft a working document for the upcoming Synod on Young People. What do young Catholics really want from their church? The Papal Posse, Robert Royal and Father GERALD Murray, will join us with analysis. And March 27th marked the second anniversary of the death of our dear foundress, Mother Mary Angelica. We'll remember her life and legacy with a special World Over tribute. The World Over, the Holy Week edition, begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important world over for you tonight, the Papal Posse, Robert Royal, Father GERALD Murray, and a special remembrance of Mother Angelica on the second anniversary of her passing. All of that is straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, you can tweet me at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. Before we start, a big book birthday to announce, and some news. I'm delighted to report that Will Wilder 2, The Lost Staff of Wonders, is now out in paperback. It'll be premiering on April 3rd. I know a lot of you like paperback editions, and this one comes with an added bonus. Inside is a special preview of Will Wilder 3, and the title reveal. What is it? Will Wilder and... I can't tell you yet. But you can pre-order this paperback edition of the Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders now, and get it in time for Easter. Both books in the Will Wilder series are now available in hardback, paperback, and dramatic audio. Go to willwilderbooks.com, to the EWTN Religious Catalog, Amazon, or your independent bookseller to order, and Will Wilder 3 is coming soon. Stay tuned for that. Now to some news. In spite of the reported imminent agreement between the Vatican and Communist China and a lessening of tensions, an underground bishop was arrested this week. According to Asia News, Bishop Vincent Guo Jin was detained on Monday to prevent him from celebrating the Chrism Mass with the underground faithful. Locals called it a kidnapping. According to the report, Bishop Guo had refused to celebrate the Chrism Mass with excommunicated Bishop Vincent Jean, the bishop recognized by the communist regime. Guo was released after the scheduled underground Chrism Mass. Bishop Guo is one of two underground bishops asked to step aside by the Holy See so that the communist recognized bishop can serve as the official diocesan leader recognized by Rome. According to a report in the UK tablet, Bishop Guo is reportedly now banned from celebrating any Mass as a bishop on the grounds that he is not recognized by the communist government. And back in Rome, Pope Francis suggested during his Sunday homily that Jesus was the first target of fake news and spin by those who wish to twist his message for their own benefit. The comments came in the wake of an embarrassing resignation of the man handpicked by the Pope to spearhead reform of the Vatican's media and communication efforts. Last week, Monsignor Dario Vigano resigned as the head of the Vatican's Secretariat for Communication after being caught spinning some of his own fake news. Vigano had selectively released portions of a letter by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. It gave the appearance that Benedict was endorsing a series of books lending theological heft to Pope Francis and further praising his theological and philosophical formation. Moreover, Vigano was caught having submitted to the press a doctored photo of the letter that concealed its second page. In it, Benedict had actually said he never read the book series, does not plan to read it, and he further criticized the selection of one of the theologians who authored the series for his anti-papal initiatives. Neither Pope Francis nor Monsignor Vigano have publicly acknowledged any wrongdoing, nor has there been a public apology to Benedict or anyone else. Vigano, in his resignation letter to the Pope, vaguely mentions his many controversies that destabilizes the complex and great task of reform, which had been entrusted to him by Francis. For his part, the Pope said he accepted Vigano's resignation, not without some effort. He further praised Vigano for his work and is actually retaining him in a newly created Vatican position of assessor for the Secretariat of Communications. Also, during his Palm Sunday homily, Pope Francis urged young people not to be silent, but rather let their voices be heard, even in the face of corrupt or silent elders. The Pope's message to awaken the youth came on the heels of a meeting with more than 300 young Catholics at the Vatican, a preparation for next October's Synod of Bishops focusing on the youth. The Pope said that the temptation to silence young people has always existed. There are many ways to silence them, to sedate them, to make them invisible, to keep them from getting involved, to make their dreams flat, dreary, petty, and plaintive. But he told youths that you have it in you to shout, even if we older people and leaders, very often corrupt, keep quiet. Here with analysis is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, with me in studio, and from Manhattan, canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Now, Robert, you just got back from the preparation for this October Youth Synod. The Pope had 305 young people around him. They consulted with the young people. First of all, we're going to get into the document that they produced, kind of the preparatory document for the bishops' discussion in October. Why are we listening to young people who really haven't experienced a lot of life or God, frankly?
Well, my way of understanding this is I think that Francis likes these processes. He talks a lot about starting a process and just
synodality.
Synodality. And in this particular case, I mean, I'm a little bit divided in my reactions. On the one hand, I just love those young people there. They're energetic, they're enthusiastic, they're sincere. The other side of it is they know almost nothing about the church, about why the church thinks the way that it does. Mm-hmm. And so they put out things that I think the bishops probably already knew, but it's part of what Pope Francis, I think, hopes will be a way of evangelizing, that by inviting people to speak, to not putting up barriers to them immediately on moral questions and on ecclesial questions, that somehow it'll engage them and bring them back into the fold. Obviously, the concrete suggestions that they make are suggestions that a 20-something person makes without understanding the nature of what they're talking about.
Now, Father Jerry, there was a lot of discussion about this naturally. The Roman press, you know, the Vatican press always goes crazy over anything announced. They cover it like it's the Olympics. But there was a lot of excitement about this. The question I have is, most of these young people are catechized not by the church, but by the world. So what fruit can this dialogue, this interaction bring forth?
The dialogue is important if it's a dialogue in which information is being communicated to people who lack it. So I'm always suspicious when there's a document with people who don't really know Catholic teaching, then tell us that we need to re-examine these teachings in order to be more relevant in the modern age. I think the mission of the church is to communicate the Word of God, and it's obvious that that hasn't been very well communicated in the last 20, 30 years to the coming generation. So to sit down, and I looked at this document, and it's very concerning because it's basically rehashing secular criticisms of Catholic morality and then bringing up the subject of why don't we have women priests? Why isn't there equality in the church? This is not what we need to be discussing right now. This is basically just continuing what I would say is a revolutionary process that's fomented when we take these questions and treat them as open questions. They're not open questions.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of these open questions, as you say. This is the pre-synodal document that these young people produced. We'll put it up on the screen. I want both of you to react to this. The church, oftentimes it reads, appears as too severe and is often associated with excessive moralism. Sometimes in the church it's hard to overcome the logic of it has always been done this way. We need a church that is welcoming and merciful. Robert Royal, your reaction.
I've been a writer my entire adult life, and for the last 10 years I've been the editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing, and I detect in this text some other hands than those of the 20-year-olds. There's something else obviously going on here, because the language that's being used is language that various officials in the church have been using. Look, the long and the short of this is, will a process like this actually evangelize the way that Father was talking about? Does it go out to people? Does it teach them? And does it bring people in? We haven't seen that so far in this papacy. It's a very different approach to the rest of the world. But like you, I believe that these young people have been catechized not by the church, but by our culture. And if the church seems distant, it's not as if the church has moved away from where it's always been. It's that the culture has moved away, and not simply away, but it has set itself up in opposition to the church. The church is still, I mean, we've got to recognize, as weak as in many ways Catholicism is culturally, the church is really still the one institution in the West that stands against many of the developments that we see that are progressive and really depart quite far from biblical Christianity, both of the Catholic and evangelical and Protestant varieties. So it's not surprising that these young people feel that, but whether it's the truth, whether the church is being moralistic and not receptive, I think that that's another judgment that has to be made.
Father Jerry, there was the line here, we mentioned it a moment ago, sometimes in the church it's hard to overcome the logic of it has always been done this way. That line that appears in this pre-synodal document, supposedly from these young people, allegedly, that was a line Pope Francis used in his opening address to them, that we have to get away from this notion that it has always been done this way. Are we, as Robert Royal wrote this week, looking at a little bit of ventriloquism here, with old Vatican hands using these kids as convenient mouthpieces?
That's always the suspicion, Raymond, because young people may not organize their thoughts in the precise language that we just heard. You know, to talk about the church is severe and moralistic. I mean, that's a complaint I hear constantly, usually from people who don't accept Catholic morality. Now, my question is, when you say things have always been done this way, that's not a justification. In the history of the church, since we're passing on a message given 2,000 years ago, doctrine, practices, ways of living, they're inherited, they're cherished and appreciated. And in fact, you know, people who are cultural Catholics, they look back on their family formation as mainly the transmitter of faith through festivals and feasts and beliefs. If something has been done away in the church for a long time, the presumption is it's a good thing that we need to preserve. So, you know, the logic of it was done in the past, it needs to be rejected, unless you can explain it to me instantaneously why I need to do it, you know, that's a formula for chaos. I would not agree that young people should be encouraged to say, whatever's in the past, just put it aside. We're going to give you a new formula today.
Interesting. Robert Royal, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the Father makes the important distinction here that the thing that's always been done is, if it's based on what Jesus himself in the revelation of God gave us in our New Testament and in the life of Christ, well, that's actually a good thing that has persisted over 2,000 years. Now, the one thing that we can say that doesn't have to be done the way it always has been done in the past is somewhat at the outreach, somewhat the way that you speak to people. I was very struck in this document that the young people, and maybe it wasn't them again, maybe somebody along the way encouraged them to write this, but they talk about how in the past the faith was conveyed by the family, first of all, and then by other institutions like the local parish, and then by the culture more generally. They recognize that there's a crisis in the family, that often the parishes that they're in are not very dynamic, and that the culture is very much set against the faith. So they see that those things are now missing, the transmission belts that we had in the past. They don't have any idea of how to replace them, but they recognize that something needs to be done. They don't then take the second step, which is maybe we need to find some ways to restore those institutions that were they're irreplaceable. There's
Who were these people? Who were these young people? Who are they? Where did they come from?
Well,
I know they came from all over the world.
They come from all over the world.
But they're not all Catholic.
No, not all of them are Catholics. Some are, I think, very sincere Catholics and energetic Catholics. Some are more doubtful. There were some non-believers in the mix. There were even some Muslims, according to what was reported on. So what you get out of this is kind of an echo chamber of what young people are talking about. Some of them are closer to the church. Some of them don't even know anything about the church. And in some ways, it may be good to get that on the record, but I have to think that bishops of the Roman Catholic Church pretty much know what young people are thinking and why it is that it's been so difficult to retain them.
Yeah, I want to put up another full screen. This also from that pre-synodal document. Look at this. The Church can play a vital role in ensuring that these young people are not marginalized but feel accepted. This can happen when we seek to promote the dignity of women, both in the Church and in wider society. Today, there is a genuine problem in society in that women are still not given an equal place. This is also true in the Church. Father GERALD Murray, your reaction.
Yeah, I read that and I was not happy at all. I do not accept that characterization of the role of women in the Church. I think this is a message being given by those who believe in women's ordination, that we won't be happy until women can become priests. This is not what Jesus Christ established when he founded the Church. The apostles were ordained on Holy Thursday by our Lord as the first priests, and the Church has always ordained only men. Now, as regards true equality in the Church, that exists because we're all baptized believers. The sons and daughters of God share a radical equality. And I would say, in my experience as a pastor, women do more to promote the mission of the Church in the United States than men do. I wish that weren't the case, but I know when I'm looking for volunteers, I'm looking for catechists, I'm looking for people to do apostolate, the women are much more willing. There are a variety of reasons for that, but certainly we should never give in to this notion that until women can do everything that a man can do in the Church, including being a priest, that somehow the Church is being unfair. Jesus Christ was not unfair when he only ordained men. He's divine. He did what he wanted to do, and there's a reason for it.
No, you make a good point. I mean, God knows, two of the best-known Catholics, probably the most influential in the 20th century into the 21st, was Mother Teresa and Mother Angelica. I mean, aside from a pope, that's it. And that is a form of female leadership that I think oftentimes the world ignores and these kids don't know anything about.
Yeah. And women have a different way of looking at things
Perception.
and bring different energies into the Church. You know, one of the things that happened, I don't know how much it was reported here because I was in Rome last week when this was all going on, is that there were some, Father calls them women's ordination people. There were actually some women who came along and said, we want female cardinals, because cardinals don't necessarily have to be priests. In the past, that hasn't been necessarily the case. But it's clear that some groups were seeking around the edges, and we've seen this at other synods and preparations for synods, that given what the modern world is, it's easy to get a big megaphone when you're over in Rome and something like this is going on. It's worth saying that Francis himself, however, Pope Francis has said that the question of female ordination is closed.
Okay, I want to go to this. Again, another full screen. There is often great disagreement among young people, both within the Church and in the wider world, about some of her teachings, which are especially controversial today. Examples of these include contraception, abortion, homosexuality, cohabitation, marriage, and how the priesthood is perceived in different realities in the Church. What is important to note is that irrespective of their level of understanding of Church teaching, there is still disagreement and ongoing discussion among young people on these polemical issues. As a result, they may want the Church to change her teaching, or at least to have access to a better explanation and to more formation on these questions. We, the young Church, ask that our leaders speak in practical terms about controversial subjects such as homosexuality and gender issues, about which young people are already freely discussing without taboo. Father GERALD Murray, I'll give you first crack at that. What do you think this is about?
Right. This is about promoting a revolution in the Church in which sexual morality and Catholic doctrine will be redefined. And I say that precisely because you do not call Catholic doctrine a polemical issue if you consider it to be true. Polemical, when you call something polemical, you're basically saying someone's exaggerating to try and control other people by enforcing his point of view with fear. Catholic teaching about sexual morality is rooted in the way we are, human dignity, the purpose what God created us for. And, let me say this, we need the teaching to be better explained. The teaching has been explained magnificently by the Catholic magisterium in the last 30 to 40 years. I don't think the problem is the explanation's not there. People either reject it, don't care to read it, or are told it's going to change, so don't bother, trying to defend it. We do not need a revolutionary movement coming out of a synod on the youth concerning issues that we know are being promoted by secularists and people who think Christian morality is an imposition on man. Christian morality is the only way that people can be free and be themselves. That's our message.
Robert Royal, given what we just read, where do you see this shaping that October Synod? Does this become the marching orders for the bishops? We saw this during the Family Synod. It wasn't supposed to be about divorced and remarried Catholics getting communion, but that's what it really became about. And it's a lingering wound and source of confusion throughout the church. Are we looking at Amoris Laetitia Part 2 here?
Well, it's very possible, because the way that the reasoning is going to take place is going to be, again, well, we're not changing doctrine, but we're pastorally reaching out to people. We've talked about the deep theological issues many times here in regard to Amoris Laetitia. I never get tired of saying, look, if young people are going to dispute the first page of Genesis, male and female, he created them, and say that somehow that is not operative any longer. When our Lord in the New Testament says to the Pharisees, Moses let you divorce because you were weak, but I say to you, male and female, he created them. Then he goes on and gives that tougher teaching. If you're going to reject the documents that tell us what Christianity is, where it has begun, if Christianity got male and female wrong from the beginning, and Judaism and Christianity got that wrong, then I don't know what kind of dialogue can go on between people in the contemporary world and the church, unless the church wants to just join sort of modern culture, in which case it's clear that it will go the way of the liberalizing Protestant denominations, which is to say they're all dying. The ones that survive are the more theologically robust evangelical and some of the smaller Protestant faith groups. But otherwise, it's just a concession. And we've seen that some elements in and around the Vatican seek to exploit these events precisely for this kind of purpose.
Father Jerry, last word on this before I get to some other topics. Do you see this as a precursor to another Amoris Laetitia, where we have a pastoral consideration that takes on doctrinal implications?
I think Bob's point is very prescient here, that indeed people will take the process and turn it away from really talking about young people need to know. Young people need to know, who is Jesus Christ? He is the Son of God, and this is what he taught. Instead, if we have to get into this defensive position which says Catholic teaching on sexual morality is polemical, it's not understood, it's hard to understand, therefore we have to trim it here and there. No, I'm worried about what can happen, and only because as we said with Amoris Laetitia, a synod on the family got turned into a Cardinal Walter Casper proposal endorsement that people who are in adulterous second marriages should freely receive communion in some circumstance. That was not what it was supposed to be about.
I want to move on. Lettergate exploded since we were last together, Papal Posse. We saw this doctored photograph of a letter from Pope Benedict that supposedly endorsed, well, I reported it earlier, you know what we're talking about. Archbishop Vigano, or Monsignor Vigano, resigned, who was head of the communications office. What is the lingering fallout of this? And considering the Pope's condemnation of fake news, has this really wounded the Vatican's communication apparatus?
Well, I mean, this is the first of the Pope's close-in collaborators actually to be dismissed. Others, like Cardinal Mueller, who seem to be in some tension with him, have left the scene. Cardinal Burke, of course, most notably. The thing I'm most struck about, or the two things I'm most struck about this Lettergate controversy, is why do it? Monsignor Vigano is not a stupid man, but it was a very foolish thing to take a letter from Pope Emeritus Benedict, setting himself at some distance from these little booklets that came out on theology, and then turning it into a kind of endorsement. Well, there are only two reasons why someone would take the great risk of doing this when it's very likely to become known. We've talked about it, and lots of others who've commented on the Pope have talked about this. First of all, they're feeling some nervousness about the critique that he is not in continuity with his
What
predecessors.
went before.
And secondly, they're worried about his reputation as being a theologian, because he's not really ever been seriously involved in theological thought. He's got his own kind of pastoral approach. But those two things, the lack of continuity and the lack of theological depth, I think somebody somewhere in the Vatican feels nervous about this. And that's why you take this extreme step of misrepresenting something that was supposed to actually be a private letter to make a defense that turns out to actually create more controversy than it solved.
Father Jerry, we're seeing another area where there is a tug of war, if you will. Again, it's an attempt to my eyes, spin reality in one way or the other, and you have dueling camps around this Vatican-China deal. There is a camp within the Vatican saying all is well, China is the great exemplar of Catholic social thought, and this is the only responsible way to go forward. There's Cardinal Zen and others saying, no, 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 this is the end of the underground church. Now, you heard the story I reported earlier on Bishop Guo, who was arrested, held captive, and now released, but he's forbidden to say Mass. What's going on here, and is this another example of the Vatican communications apparatus trying to spin something that is not in continuity with reality?
Well, yes, let's unpack this, Raymond. As regards the Chinese issue, I think the communists recognize weakness. They recognize the Vatican wants to deal more than they do, so therefore they're going to push as much as they can to enforce their control over the Catholic Church by arresting this bishop and then freeing him and forbidding him. Now, as regards the earlier comment about Monsignor Vigano, it's fascinating. This Pope wants to have modern communications. He set up the Secretariat for Communications. Right. And then what did we have? We had a falsification of a papal communication. They only came clean when secular journalists and some religious journalists pointed out problems. And then they did a drip-by-drip limited release and then finally put the whole communications out in public. The Pope accepted the resignation, but then reappointed this man back to his office in a lesser role, but who knows what it can exactly mean. And then let's remember this. Vigano, whether he thought about it or not, he very much offended Pope Emeritus Benedict by doing this, and there's been no public apology to Pope Benedict for this. So the impression left here is that this man tried to manipulate it, got caught, but then he's not really being punished in a way that would recognize the gravity of what happened. That is going to hurt the Vatican's credibility with the secular media, and certainly it doesn't help that this was done in an effort, as we know, to falsify the record about what Benedict thought about one of the authors. Benedict objected to one of the authors in this series, who was in fact a vehement critic of Catholic teaching, and why he was included in this group of writings is his name is Hunnerman, a German theologian. Beyond belief. Why would you put a dissident theologian in a series published by the Vatican itself? Very troubling.
No, these are two major black eyes, I think, for the Vatican's communication apparatus. Both this Lettergate as well as this ongoing China story, because the reality on the ground, the reality of a bishop in the underground church being arrested, totally contradicts and undercuts this happy talk that they've been pushing out there. Meanwhile, you've got Zen, who they're attacking as well, publicly. I think this does not feel right to a lot of Catholics and to media looking in on this.
Well, I mean, we're dealing with a totalitarian regime.
Right.
You know, their president, so-called president, just probably became president for life, which is almost a textbook definition of a dictatorship, totalitarian regime. You cannot be weak with these people. All the former Soviet dissidents who stood up to the Soviet Union back during the Cold War say, you cannot gain anything by negotiating in this way with totalitarian regimes. You can always lose, because they can hold out forever. And we've seen it's not simply a question of two opposing views of the world. We've seen the Chinese actually put the screws on the church since February in increasingly difficult ways. So I'm very skeptical of what's going forward at this point, and the only way to understand this is to look to the people who you trust in the way they judge things, certainly Cardinal Zen and some others who have raised the worries, in my mind, are the most credible voices.
Yeah, well, that bishop we talked about earlier, who was arrested this week, the man has been arrested 20 times just this year. or last year rather, you can't say that this is an anomaly. It happens all over mainland China, and there is a targeting of the underground church. They want to co-opt it into this patriotic association. That's what's happening. And I think people undermine their credibility when they try to peddle a false narrative to create a pathway for a Vatican China détente. It's not going to work. It won't work. China will win. And if Donald Trump has taught everybody one thing, it is playing this game, you will lose. You've got to find another way to disrupt the narrative. Anyway, final comment, I want to share this with you. This is the Pope during Holy Week. He offered this at his Wednesday audience. He told the assembled, and you're seeing the video here, this is a deviation from his prepared remarks. And here I have to say something sad and painful. There are fake Christians, those who say Jesus is risen, I have been justified by Jesus, I have a new life, but I live a corrupt life. These fake Christians will have a terrible end. A Christian, I repeat, is a sinner. We are all sinners. I am one, but we are certain that when we ask forgiveness, the Lord will forgive us. The corrupt person pretends to be an honorable person, but in the end, there is putrefaction in the heart. Father Jerry, your reaction?
Well, those are strong words from the Pope, and he certainly is trying to highlight that you should never live a double life, that you should never be a hypocrite, pretending to be a devout Catholic and then doing horrible things. Now, the question is, what is his understanding of corruption as an ongoing state in life? Because, the worst sinner can make a confession and then go right to heaven, if he dies in the state of grace and having all of, getting a plenary indulgence. We believe that redemption can happen pretty quickly. So when the Pope goes off the script, he basically, by saying you're a fake Christian, well, you're a Christian if you're a sinner. You may not be a good Christian, but you're still a Christian. So I understand what he's trying to get at, because there are a lot of people who like to parade around. And by the way, they're not only those in the mafia, there are other categories who like to say, listen to me, I know what Catholicism is. And meanwhile, they undermine it by the way they live.
Yeah. Robert Royal, your reaction. And look, in the pontificate of mercy, this is a kind of discordant note.
I don't know. It sounds very much like Jesus to me. I'd like to know who he's talking about here, frankly. It kind of has universal application, because obviously everybody is a sinner other than the Virgin Mary, every human being, right? But the odd thing to me about this is that he seems to be talking about hypocrites. And so who are these hypocrites? They pretend to be honorable and without sin. I don't know too many Christians who will not admit that they're sinners. It's good in a way that he addresses this to everybody who is perhaps trying to present themselves one way and privately living a different life. But I'm wondering, why go off script? I'm getting to be very suspicious in my old age, and I'm wondering why go off script and make a point of saying this during Holy Week.
Happy Easter to you. Robert Royal, Father Jerry Murray, thank you both for being with us. You can follow Robert Royal and Father Jerry's commentary at thecatholicthing.org.